She felt the fabric ripped from her dress right there in the bustling company lobby during the final rehearsal for Pinnacle Solutions' biggest conference of the year. A young co-worker, Jared Foster, lunged at her from behind, his hand rough as he yanked the soft material aside. His voice cut through the air like a whip. "Let's see what this cheap black girl is hiding under that clearance rack dress." It all happened in an instant, yet time seemed to freeze, etching a scene of humiliation and pain in everyone's mind. The crowd preparing for the conference pivoted, shock and cruel excitement flickering in their curious, intrusive stares. Phones whipped out. Mocking laughter echoed through the grand hall, each jeer a blade to her dignity. Grace Miller stood motionless for a heartbeat. A slender black woman in a crisp white blouse tucked into a modest beige skirt, her natural curls pulled neatly back, her face usually calm and resolute now went steel-cold with controlled fury. She didn't scream or cry. Slowly, deliberately, she smoothed her dress back into place, adjusting her clothes with poise. In that moment, the malicious gazes shifted to awkward surprise. Jared, still grinning with contempt, hesitated, but his confidence was bolstered by the jeers of his friends. "She must be mortified." Ethan Walker, Jared's close ally, sneered. "Bet she'll be calling in sick tomorrow." "She's worthless anyway." Samantha White, the glamorous head of marketing who'd long ridiculed Grace, added, her eyes alight with scorn. "Better if she just quits now." Laughter rolled on like a toxic wave, but Grace said nothing. She stood for a second longer, her gaze sweeping the room with an eerie calm. In that silent sweep, her eyes burned with quiet resolve, sharp as a blade, making a few onlookers recoil. Even Jared's smirk faltered for a moment before he rallied under his colleagues' jeers. Without a word, Grace turned and walked away. Her flats padded softly against the marble floor, each step imprinting a silent declaration. "I won't be broken so easily." She strode toward the elevators, the crowd's taunts trailing behind her, unaware that the woman they'd humiliated was none other than Lucas Miller's wife. Lucas being the global chairman of Pinnacle Solutions, the man who held the fate of the entire company in his hands. When the elevator doors closed, Grace leaned against the cold steel wall and took a deep, steadying breath. She smoothed her dress again, fingers trembling ever so slightly but controlled. Her eyes dropped to the small silver pendant at her throat, the gift Lucas had given her during their leanest days. She touched it tenderly, feeling the metal's chill remind her of the strength found in silence and dignity. She remembered Lucas's words on a tranquil afternoon. "You are the strongest woman I've ever met. Never let anyone hurt you." She closed her eyes for a moment, letting those words echo in her heart, a reminder of her true worth beyond any insult. When she opened them, her resolve shimmered. The elevator dinged at her floor, and the doors slid open to the quiet familiarity of her workspace, her little desk tucked in a forgotten corner, unnoticed by nearly everyone. Seated at her desk, Grace opened her laptop and resumed her work as if nothing had happened, refusing to let this latest affront shake her. Yet, deep inside, she knew today was just the beginning. Soon, everyone would learn that this unassuming, silent black woman they'd so casually demeaned was far from weak. And one day they would pay for their cruelty. Below in the lobby, Jared still basked in his so-called triumph, patting Ethan on the back. "She's bound to disappear from here soon," he chuckled. Ethan nodded, but a flicker of unease crossed his face as he remembered Grace's piercing gaze. He shook off the chill and laughed with Jared and their cronies. Meanwhile, Grace sat at her desk, eyes calm on the screen but fire building in her heart. It was time to wield her true power and end this injustice once and for all. No one at the company suspected that, from the moment they humiliated Grace, a silent but raging storm had been born, waiting to sweep them all away. And that day would come very soon. While Grace calmly finished the last lines of the contract she'd left undone at her desk, the shameful echo of the lobby incident still rippled quietly throughout Pinnacle Solutions' office. Subtle, mocking glances darted her way. Smiles of derision peeked out from behind computer screens. It seemed that Jared Foster's cruel stunt wasn't just a one-off joke. It was an open invitation for everyone who already looked down on Grace to indulge in their hidden prejudice without restraint. Pinnacle Solutions, renowned as a top-tier contracts consultancy, occupies the 35th floor of a sleek downtown Chicago high-rise. Floor-to-ceiling windows flood the space with natural light. Spacious workstations, leather-upholstered chairs, and high-end monitors line the glossy floor plan. Yet beneath this polished exterior lurked a toxic undercurrent, unseen by most, but deeply felt by those on the receiving end. Grace Miller, the petite, unassuming contract assistant, was the perfect target for this culture. Her desk sat at the far end of the row, tucked into a flickering fluorescent-lit corner. It was purposefully isolated from the busier teams. On her desk, an older laptop, a neat stack of documents, and a reusable water bottle, an object of endless ridicule whenever anyone passed by. One Monday morning, arriving early to prep for a big meeting, Grace overheard Vanessa Scott, the sales team lead, speaking loudly with Samantha White by the pantry just down the aisle. Vanessa's voice was deliberately raised so everyone could hear, sharp as a razor's edge. She really thinks she belongs here dressing like that every day? And of all people, she's the only black employee. This company's recruitment standards must be slipping. Samantha tittered, her laughter as cold as ice, blending with the hum of the coffee machine. Exactly. She looks like a temp, right? Have we totally run out of qualified assistants? Vanessa nodded toward Grace's desk, where Grace quietly arranged fresh printouts, and added with disdain, "Or is this some charity gig? A humble black woman hauling a boring homemade lunch to the office every day just screams impoverished. Since when did Pinnacle become a charity?" Laughter erupted, mingling with whispers racing down the cubicle rows. Curious and spiteful eyes flicked to Grace, eager to see her reaction. But Grace said nothing. She straightened the stack of files as calmly and precisely as ever, as if their barbed comments barely registered. Yet only Grace knew her heart was tightening at each cruel word, each barb a hidden knife slicing deeper. It wasn't her first time facing covert racism here. Since her first day 4 months ago, contempt and dismissal had shadowed her steps. Jibes about her simple attire, sneers at her homemade meals, even veiled comments about her modest background and race. She'd grown accustomed to remarks like, "She can't even afford a decent lunch, I bet." Guess nobody at home taught her how to dress for a high-end firm. People like her don't have skills, just freeloaders on the company. Grace had learned never to show hurt. She knew any reaction would give them more ammunition, cementing their belief that she was weak and unworthy. Each afternoon, while colleagues gathered chattering around the upscale coffee station, Grace sat alone, methodically working through page after page of contracts. She focused on her tasks tirelessly, never complaining, because she believed in the power of dignity and professionalism. Every contract she prepared was flawless, not a single error, and she trusted that one day her dedication would be recognized. But now, with the insults growing sharper and more brazen, Grace felt that silence and patience alone might no longer suffice. Perhaps it was time to take action, to stand up and prove that a person's worth could never be judged by skin color or simple appearance. Looking around the vast office, Grace's eyes swept over the indifferent faces filled with malice. They settled on Vanessa and Samantha, her relentless tormentors, for a long moment. Deep inside, a plan was forming. Not just to protect her own dignity, but to show everyone that they had been terribly wrong about her. And this time, Grace decided she would not remain silent. Before Grace could fully form her quiet plan, the lunch bell rang, shattering the heavy atmosphere in the Pinnacle Solutions office. Grace took a deep breath, neatly folded her documents, then stood, gently lifting her familiar lunchbox as she made her way toward the communal dining area. With calm, measured steps, she seemed to be trying to leave behind all the insults and malicious glances of her colleagues. Yet, the moment her foot hit the cafeteria floor, she could immediately feel the air thick with judgment waiting for her. The dining room was crowded with employees, all dressed impeccably in brand-new designer outfits that exuded an air of haughtiness and detachment. The soft clinking of cutlery, cheerful laughter, and the aroma of gourmet dishes filled the room. Grace, in her simple white blouse, beige skirt, and modest lunchbox, stood in stark contrast to all the extravagance around her. She chose a table in a far corner, hoping to avoid the scrutinizing stares of her nosy coworkers. Quietly, she opened her lunchbox, ready to start the meal she had carefully prepared that morning. But before she could pick up her spoon, she heard the sharp click-clack of high heels, each step brimming with pride, approaching her table. It was Samantha White, head of marketing. A white woman with golden hair, always perfectly made up and wearing the most expensive designer clothes. Samantha, her face radiating confidence and arrogance, stood right beside Grace's table, her gaze sweeping from the plain lunchbox up to Grace's face with undisguised contempt. "Oh my God, look everyone," Samantha said loudly, her tone sarcastic and as sharp as a blade that sliced through the silence, making everyone in the cafeteria turn to look. "I thought they hired her just to hit those diversity quotas, but apparently they also needed someone to represent the poor, thrifty class, too." The room instantly erupted in suppressed laughter. A few people covered their mouths, but none could hide their amusement at watching Grace sit silently and endure the humiliation. Encouraged by their reactions, Samantha pulled out her expensive phone and brazenly snapped a photo of Grace's lunchbox, then taunted further. "How pathetic. I wonder what kind of delicacy could be hiding in this cheap plastic container." She immediately posted the photo on the company's internal social network with a vicious caption. "Company culture is going downhill. Must be because they're overdoing the diversity hires." Within minutes, the image and post went viral, and hateful, mocking comments about Grace began popping up on every employee's phone. Grace didn't look up. Her eyes remained fixed on her simple lunch. Her hand trembled slightly, her heart pounding as each second felt like an eternity. Anger and pain swelled within her. The patience she'd held onto for so long was about to burst. But just as she was about to speak, a deeper part of her reminded her to stay calm, to preserve her dignity. Summoning every ounce of composure she had left, Grace lifted her head and looked Samantha straight in the eyes. Her gaze was more powerful than ever, causing Samantha to involuntarily step back half a pace, her mocking smile freezing for a moment. Grace spoke softly but firmly. "Thank you, Samantha, for taking such an interest in my lunch. But I believe we're all here to work, not to mock one another like this." Grace's words were as gentle as a breeze, yet sharp enough to silence the cafeteria in an instant. Some employees glanced at each other in confusion, surprised that this petite, unassuming black woman had the nerve to say that to Samantha, the widely feared and powerful figure in the company. Samantha's face flushed red, a flicker of embarrassment crossing her features at being caught off guard. But she quickly regained her haughty stance, tossing her hair to one side and replying in a cutting tone, "Who do you think you are to lecture me, Grace? Don't forget your place in this company." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving behind soft giggles and pitying, sneering glances directed at Grace. Grace remained seated, staring at her lunchbox, a wave of humiliation choking her throat. Her eyes glistened slightly, but not a single tear fell. In that moment, Grace realized one thing. She could no longer endure in silence. Samantha, Vanessa, Jared, and all those who perpetually looked down on her had crossed the line. Silence alone wouldn't protect her dignity and self-worth. It was time for her to stand up and put an end to this. Taking a deep breath, Grace calmly snapped the lid shut on her uneaten lunch and stood up, leaving the cafeteria. All eyes followed her, filled with curiosity and confusion, unaware that in this moment, Grace was beginning to set the stage for a powerful and unexpected retaliation. And this time, it would be those who had looked down on and mocked her who would bear the heaviest consequences. Leaving the lunchroom with a heavy heart, Grace walked down the hallway of Pinnacle Solutions' office, her flats clicking softly and evenly on the cold marble floor. Samantha's cruel taunts still rang loud in her mind, but Grace was determined not to let them knock her down. As she passed rows of workstations filled with scornful glances, she didn't notice a pair of youthful eyes watching her closely from the far corner, eyes tinged with skepticism and a hint of surprise. It was Tim Carter, a young data analyst who hadn't been with the company long and who always maintained a discreet, cautious demeanor with his colleagues. Driven by his curious nature, Tim often stayed late at the office to explore the firm's history, poring over old records of important past contracts. It was during one of those late nights that he stumbled upon Grace Miller's name in the company's confidential archives, in a role entirely different from her current position. From what Tim discovered, Grace Miller was far from the ordinary assistant everyone assumed. Her name appeared prominently on the original founding documents of the company's key contracts, listed alongside the powerful moniker of global chairman Lucas Miller. Tim was stunned to realize that the quiet, modest black woman everyone gossiped about was likely one of the very people who had laid the foundations for Pinnacle Solutions' success. Carrying this monumental secret, Tim decided he could no longer keep it to himself. After today's humiliating lunchroom incident, he understood that the truth needed to come out. At least so Grace would no longer endure such unwarranted ridicule. That afternoon, as the office emptied out, Tim cautiously approached Grace's small desk, tucked away at the end of the hallway. Just as he prepared to speak, he heard heavy, proud footsteps behind him. "Hey, Tim, what are you doing here? Since when do you care about a low-level employee like Grace?" Tim turned to see Mike Harris and Greg Coleman, two senior staff members notorious for their arrogance and for looking down on subordinates, especially Grace. Mike, always slick with strong cologne and a disdainful grin, eyed Tim suspiciously. "Got something to say, Tim? Or are you planning to play the hero and defend that poor black girl?" Greg sneered, his tone dripping with mockery. Tim steadied himself and replied calmly but firmly, "I just wanted to ask Grace about some work-related documents. That's all." Mike raised an eyebrow and laughed viciously. "Oh, really? I thought you had something grand and noble in mind. Here's a friendly tip, Tim. Stop pretending to be buddy-buddy with her. Don't let yourself get dragged down by someone so beneath you." Greg placed a firm hand on Tim's shoulder, squeezing lightly as a pointed warning. "Listen, you're new here, and your future's ahead of you. Best choose your friends wisely. Grace isn't worth your effort, got it?" Tim met their eyes, his heart pounding. These powerful men were clearly issuing more than advice. They were delivering a cold, coercive threat. But Tim, a man of principle, held his ground. "Thanks for the warning, but I know what I'm doing. I have the right to collaborate with anyone in this company." Mike laughed coldly, patting Tim's shoulder again. "Fine, suit yourself. But remember this, Tim, you're asking for trouble." With that, Mike and Greg turned and walked away, though Greg shot one last contemptuous glance at Grace, who stood quietly observing from afar. Tim exhaled sharply, tension flooding his mind. He knew he was now a marked man among Mike, Greg, and their allies, yet he also knew he could no longer stay silent or watch Grace be mistreated any longer. Summoning his courage, he approached Grace's desk and leaned in, speaking in a low, earnest voice. "Grace, this might sound strange, but I came across some documents. Proof that you're not just an ordinary contract assistant. Who are you really, Grace?" Grace looked up, meeting Tim's gaze with equal parts surprise and caution. She paused, weighing his words, then replied softly, "Tim, I'm just someone trying to do my job well, but thank you for caring." Tim nodded, recognizing it wasn't the moment to push further. He stared at Grace with determination, silently promising himself that no matter the pressure, he would find a way to bring the truth to light. What Tim didn't know was that his decision would open the door to a chain of unexpected events. Those who had underestimated Grace would soon have to face a truth they never could have imagined. Leaving the lunchroom with a heavy heart, Grace walked down the Pinnacle Solutions hallway, her flats tapping softly and evenly against the cold marble floor. Samantha's cruel taunts still rang loud in her mind, but Grace was determined not to let them knock her down. As she passed row after row of scornful workstations, she didn't notice a pair of young eyes watching her intently from the far corner. Eyes filled with skepticism and a hint of surprise. Those eyes belonged to Tim Carter, a new data analyst who kept to himself and spoke with colleagues only when necessary. Tim often stayed late, poring over the company's founding documents and archive of past contracts. It was during one of those late nights that he stumbled upon Grace Miller's name in the confidential files, listed not as an assistant, but as a key collaborator alongside Global Chairman Lucas Miller. Shocked, Tim realized that the modest black woman everyone dismissed was actually one of the people who had helped build Pinnacle Solutions from the ground up. Holding that secret, he knew he couldn't keep silent any longer. After today's lunchroom humiliation, it was time for the truth to come out, so that Grace would no longer have to endure their unwarranted cruelty. Later that afternoon, after the office had mostly emptied, Tim carefully approached Grace's small desk at the end of the hall. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, he heard heavy footsteps behind him. "Hey, Tim, what are you doing here? Since when do you care about low-level employees like Grace?" He turned to see Mike Harris and Greg Coleman, two senior staffers notorious for their arrogance, especially toward Grace. Mike, always slick with strong cologne and a mocking grin, eyed Tim suspiciously. "You got something to say, Tim? Or are you going to play hero for that poor black girl?" Greg sneered, his tone dripping with derision. Tim took a steadying breath and replied calmly, "I just wanted to ask Grace about some work documents. That's it." Mike raised an eyebrow and laughed bitterly. "Oh, really? I thought you had some grand plan. Here's a tip, Tim. Stop trying to be friendly with her. Don't let yourself get dragged down by someone so beneath you." Greg slapped a firm hand on Tim's shoulder, a clear warning. "Listen, you're new here, and your future's ahead of you, Best choose your friends wisely. Grace isn't worth your trouble." Tim met their glare, his heart pounding. These powerful men were issuing more than advice. They were delivering a threat. But he stood his ground. "Thanks for the concern, but I can talk to anyone I need to. That's my right in this company." Mike laughed coldly, patted Tim's shoulder again, then turned away with Greg. Before leaving, Greg threw one last disdainful look toward Grace, who was quietly observing from her desk. Tim exhaled, tension flooding his mind. He knew he was now a target of Mike, Greg, and their allies. But he also knew he couldn't remain silent any longer, nor watch Grace continue to suffer their abuse. Swallowing his nerves, he walked to Grace's desk and leaned in. "Grace, this may sound strange, but I found some documents proving you're not just an ordinary assistant." "Who are you, really?" Grace looked up, meeting Tim's eyes with a mix of surprise and caution. She paused, weighing his words, then answered softly, "Tim, I'm just someone trying to do my job well, but thank you for caring." Tim nodded, realizing it wasn't time to reveal everything yet. He looked at her with resolve, silently vowing to bring the full truth to light. What Tim didn't know was that his choice to speak up would set off a chain of events none of them could have predicted. Those who underestimated Grace would soon learn just how wrong they were. Over the next few days, tensions at Pinnacle Solutions reached an all-time high. Although Grace did her best to stay calm and focused, her recent victory had clearly ignited an even fiercer wave of hatred from Jared, Mike, and Greg. Every morning she faced their icy, malicious stares. Sometimes she even caught half-smiles of derision and whispers loud enough to hear the insults. Still, she refused to let any of it break her spirit. Maintaining her composed, professional demeanor became a quiet protest of its own. One Monday morning, Grace discovered that all the documents she'd carefully arranged over the weekend were scattered across the floor, as if someone had deliberately dumped them. Jared stood nearby with his coffee, smirking as she stooped to gather each sheet. "Hey, look, our black janitor's working overtime today," he announced, drawing amused laughter. Mike joined in, kicking the papers further away. "Grace, do you have to clean up after us just to make ends meet? I thought contract assistants at Pinnacle were paid better than that." Grace clenched her jaw against the humiliation, but said nothing, methodically picking up the pages even though her heart trembled. No sooner had she sat back down than Greg strode by and toppled his water cup onto her desk. Water splashed over the contracts, smudging the ink. Feigning shock, but clearly relishing it, he deadpanned, "Oops, must have slipped." "Good thing cleanup's your specialty, huh?" Mocking laughter rang around her, but Grace remained silent, carefully blotting the water to salvage the documents. She knew that a professional response was her strongest defense. That afternoon, at the monthly wrap-up meeting, the entire contracts team was assembled. Rachel Adams, the senior manager with icy blonde hair and a perpetually displeased expression, stood at the head of the table. Never one to hide her contempt for Grace, Rachel chose that moment to humiliate her in front of everyone. As Grace began her report, Rachel abruptly interrupted. "Grace, I don't think we need these details from you. Why are you even presenting? Maybe you'd be better suited to office cleaning." A heavy silence fell. A few lowered their heads in awkwardness, but most stared with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Samantha and Mike exchanged smug glances. Jared nodded in agreement. Yet Grace did not waver. She took a deep breath, steadied her voice, and said, "Thank you for your input, Rachel. I'm here to do the job I was assigned, and I will continue my report. I hope you'll let me finish." Caught off guard by her poise, Rachel shrugged dismissively. "Go ahead. just an assistant's report after all. Unfazed, Grace delivered her findings clearly, thoroughly, and professionally, proving that their insults could not rattle her. She knew that any sign of weakness would be seen as their victory. When the meeting ended, Grace quietly collected her materials and left. In the hallway, Rachel turned to Samantha and Mike. "I can't believe they let someone like her handle important contracts. It's a disaster." Mike nodded. "Exactly. Someone from the cleaning staff couldn't possibly manage critical work." Grace heard every cruel word, but did not look back. She continued down the hall with calm resolve, refusing to let their hatred undermine her dignity or self-respect. Back at her desk, she sat down and closed her eyes for a moment. For the first time in days, she felt her endurance nearing its limit. Then she remembered the small silver pendant Lucas had given her, a reminder of her true strength and worth. Opening her eyes, her determination burned brighter than ever. No matter how much prejudice and injustice surrounded her, she would stand firm, using her work and talent to prove them all wrong. And one day, those who had scorned and discriminated against her would pay the price for drastically underestimating Grace Miller. In the days that followed, Grace continued her work in silence, doing her best to avoid the curious stares and cutting remarks that trailed her through every corner of Pinnacle Solutions. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the obstacles her coworkers kept putting in her way, especially at company events. On the last Friday of the month, the firm held its quarterly celebration in the grand ballroom atop a luxury downtown hotel. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, soft music drifted through the air, and colleagues in expensive evening wear made the room feel utterly glamorous. But for Grace, the party felt like a high-stakes test. Though she'd steeled herself beforehand, she still felt uneasy under the cold, scrutinizing gazes that followed her as she entered. She wore a simple, elegant black dress and let her natural curls fall gently around her shoulders, an understated look that didn't spare her from the disdainful glances of Samantha, Mike, and Jared. They huddled in a small group, whispering and giggling as she passed. As she tried to find a quiet corner, a familiar, taunting voice rang out from behind. "Oh, look at our Grace, dressing up so fancy tonight. Where'd you rent that dress anyway?" Grace turned to see Brad Wilson, the head of legal, tall, impeccably groomed, and always quick with a cold, dismissive smile. Known for his authoritative tone and harsh judgments, Brad clearly enjoyed making Grace his favorite target. She replied softly, maintaining her calm. "Good evening, Brad. I don't think my dress is a topic worth your attention tonight." Brad laughed loudly, blatant contempt in his eyes. "Oh, no, I'm just surprised. Seems like you're really trying to fit in with us, Grace. But you know, no matter what you wear, you still don't belong here." He emphasized "don't belong," letting his gaze linger on her brown skin, as if to hammer home his racial insult. Grace swallowed the anger rising in her chest. The onlookers, far from intervening, leaned in, eager to see her reaction. Tim Carter, standing off to the side, clenched his fists in helpless sympathy, his face etched with pain. Before she could collect herself, Brad swaggered closer, glass of red wine in hand. In a staged misstep, he doused her dress with the wine. The dark red stain spread quickly and the surrounding crowd burst into amused laughter. "Oh, sorry about that, Grace. Really wasn't on purpose," Brad said with a mocking smile. "But hey, you must be used to getting dirty by now, right? After all, you come from such filthy origins." Laughter and cruel whispers echoed around them. Samantha chuckled nearby, nodding to Mike in satisfaction. "Told you she'd never fit in here." Grace stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding with humiliation and pain so intense she nearly couldn't breathe. She'd never felt so degraded. In that instant, she wanted to scream, to defend herself. But her pride held her back from collapsing in front of those who despised her. Drawing on the last of her composure, she inhaled deeply, then slowly lifted her chin to meet Brad's eyes with an icy, unflinching stare. "I think you've said enough, Brad. If you have any decency left, you'll stop." With that, she carefully set her glass on a nearby table and turned to walk away. Her legs trembled, but she held her posture as steady as she could, putting distance between herself and the glittering hall and the nasty laughter behind her. The scornful eyes followed until she slipped out of sight. In the quiet hallway outside, Grace leaned against the wall and closed her eyes, her heart feeling shattered. Every insult, every hateful glance replayed in her mind, filling her with pain and helplessness. A single tear escaped down her cheek, but she wiped it away quickly. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Grace," came Tim's gentle voice from behind. He looked at her with compassion and anger in equal measure. "Are you okay?" She offered him a small, strained smile, keeping her voice steady. "I'm fine, Tim. I'll get through this." Tim's expression softened, and he leaned in as if sharing a secret. "You're not alone in this. One day soon, they'll pay for what they've done to you." Grace nodded quietly. She knew the fight was far from over, and she vowed she would never surrender. Those who had underestimated and trampled her today would one day regret ever doubting the strength of this small but unbreakable woman. Early Monday morning, Pinnacle Solutions buzzed with chatter and laughter from Friday's party. But no one noticed the small figure quietly cleaning amid the gleaming rows of workstations. His eyes filled with concern. That was Joe Anderson, the company's longtime janitor. A man in his 60s with snowy white hair and a face lined by time. Joe always worked in silence, largely ignored by everyone. To the younger staff, he was just another custodian. No one spared him a second glance or a conversation. Yet, precisely because of his seemingly humble job, Joe had access to the company's confidential files more than anyone else. One day, while clearing out the old storage room, he stumbled upon a startling secret, one directly tied to a young woman named Grace Miller, whom he often saw enduring daily prejudice in silence. In a dusty file, he saw Grace Miller mentioned repeatedly as an original co-founder, someone who had helped build Pinnacle Solutions' contract foundation from day one. Joe's heart skipped a beat. The tiny woman who bore contempt without complaint turned out to be one of the very architects of the company they all worked for. From that moment on, Joe couldn't stop thinking about Grace. He replayed the scenes of her humiliation in the office and the mocking laughter at the party. Anger surged through him. He knew he could no longer stay silent. He had to do something to protect justice for Grace, the woman for whom he now felt deep respect. Determined, Joe carefully photocopied the secret documents and tucked them under his arm, planning to confront Grace or alert company leadership. But as he stepped out of the storage room, he froze. Jared Foster, Mike Harris, and Greg Coleman blocked the doorway, their eyes cold and threatening. "Well, what's old Joe doing in here?" Jared sneered, staring at the papers clutched in Joe's hand. Joe quickly hid the files behind his back, forcing a calm tone. "I'm just doing my job, boys, cleaning up and organizing this room." Greg smirked and stepped closer, his gaze razor-sharp. "Oh, really? Somehow, I feel like you're looking for something a little more interesting." Mike circled behind Joe and yanked the papers from his hand. He flipped through them, his face darkening when he saw Grace's name and the sensitive details. "So, that's it," Mike said. his voice suddenly cold and dangerous. "The old man's playing hero for the poor black girl?" Joe fell silent, his heart racing as he realized the peril he was in. Jared leaned in, his tone dripping menace. "Listen, Joe, you're too old to stir up trouble. If you think you can use this to defend Grace, you're dead wrong. Some things are better buried forever." Joe held Jared's gaze, steadying himself to speak. "I don't know what you're talking about. I just believe the truth deserves to be known." Jared laughed, his eyes glinting with threat. "You challenging us, Joe? You think you can change anything? You know where the real power lies here, don't you?" Mike closed in, bending low to whisper coldly and cruelly, "You'd best wise up, Joe. If you even think about revealing this to anyone, your job and your life will never be the same. Got it?" The storage room crackled with tension. Joe felt his legs weaken under the pressure. He was no longer young, no match physically for Jared, Mike, or Greg. Yet his conscience and his sense of justice roared louder, urging him not to bow to their threats. "I understand what you're saying," Joe managed, his voice trembling but firm. "But you can't hide the truth forever. Grace deserves respect and fairness." Greg sneered in contempt. "How naive you are, Joe. Justice and fairness don't exist here. Only power and force rule." Jared nodded to Mike, signaling him to return the papers. His tone turned stern. "Remember our warning, Joe. If you dare spill this secret, don't expect us to go easy on you just because you've worked here a long time." With that, the three walked away, leaving Joe alone in the dim storage room. He clutched the papers, torn between self-preservation and the moral imperative to stand up for justice. He knew his choice would have profound consequences, not just for himself, but for Grace, the small yet remarkably resilient woman enduring so much injustice. At that moment, Joe realized he could no longer remain silent. Sooner or later, the truth must come out, no matter what he might have to sacrifice. Monday morning, the Pinnacle Solutions office buzzed with chatter after Friday night's party. No one noticed, however, the small figure quietly cleaning amid the gleaming rows of workstations. His eyes filled with concern. It was Joe Anderson, the company's longtime janitor. Despite keeping silent under Jared and his gang's threats, in Joe's heart the flame of justice had begun to smolder. Meanwhile, Grace continued to endure in quiet patience, knowing she still had to hold on a little longer. This morning, the entire staff gathered in the grand ballroom to rehearse for the company's most important conference of the year. Tension crackled in the air as everyone scrambled to prepare documents and equipment. Grace arrived on time, wearing her usual simple work dress and a calm expression. This time, though, she could feel Jared and his clique staring at her with malicious anticipation. As Grace focused on reviewing the contracts to be presented, she sensed someone approaching from behind. Before she could react, Jared's cold hand grabbed the hem of her dress and yanked it upward in full view of the entire room. "Hey, everyone! Check out what our cheap black girl is hiding under that bargain bin dress." Jared's voice rang out, deliberately loud and clear. A horrible silence fell over the ballroom. All eyes turned to Grace. A few gasped and covered their mouths, but most stood quietly, a mix of shock and cruel amusement on their faces. In that humiliating instant, Grace quickly pulled her dress back down. Her hands shook slightly, but for the first time she lifted her gaze and met Jared's eyes with icy composure. Yet, Jared wasn't finished. He casually pulled out his phone, grinning challengingly as he recorded the entire scene. He even narrated his racist caption aloud while filming. "Feast your eyes on the real beauty of our cheap black office help. What a great joke, right?" Within seconds, Jared had posted the video on the company's social network, racking up hundreds of views and vicious comments from colleagues. He beamed with triumph as he watched Grace blanch with shame. But Jared hadn't counted on Grace's next move. She didn't cry, nor did she cower as he expected. Instead, she straightened to her full height. Her eyes burned with such fierce resolve that Jared took an involuntary step back. Grace drew a deep breath, then, her voice clear and sharp, breaking the heavy silence, addressed Jared directly. "Don't you ever touch me again." Her words were quiet, but carried a weight that rendered the room utterly silent. Jared froze, his smug smile vanishing in an instant. For the first time since he'd been bullying and humiliating her, he felt an invisible force radiate from Grace, and it unsettled him. No one in the ballroom had ever imagined that Grace, the quiet, enduring woman, could summon such unwavering strength. The looks, once filled with contempt, now flickered with doubt and confusion. Tim Carter stood near the exit, his heart swelling with admiration and respect for Grace's unexpected courage. "Who is she, really?" Samantha whispered to Mike, her voice tinged with unease. Mike frowned, recalling every instance they had mocked and insulted Grace. A strange anxiety rose in him, a premonition that they had made a grave mistake. Jared struggled to regain his composure, forcing a hollow smile for his audience. But as he scanned the crowd, he saw only wary, uncertain glances. No one was on his side anymore. Anger and fear churned inside him like never before. Meanwhile, Grace stepped down from the stage with measured, dignified strides. She no longer glanced at anyone, her eyes fixed proudly on the ballroom's exit. Colleagues stepped aside, forming a path for her, their gazes tracking her departure with a mixture of awe and curiosity. As Grace left, the room erupted into a flurry of whispers, but this time nobody was mocking her. Instead, they murmured questions, wondering about the true identity of this remarkable woman. In a distant corner, Joe Anderson leaned against the wall, his heart pounding with emotion. He knew this was the moment he'd been waiting for. The truth he'd protected could no longer be buried. Jared stood rooted in place, phone trembling in his hand, struck by panic and uncertainty. He'd never seen Grace react like that, never felt so helpless. He sensed his reign of dominance and cruelty was ending. Though Grace had left the ballroom, her words continued to echo in everyone's minds. A single, simple sentence, yet powerful enough to shake their beliefs and prejudices to the core. From that moment on, nothing at Pinnacle Solutions would ever be the same. The next morning, just as the early sunlight filtered through the windows of the Pinnacle Solutions office, the atmosphere inside felt unusually heavy. The previous day's incident at the conference still haunted everyone's minds. Cautious glances and hushed whispers about Grace rippled through every corner of the workspace. They all felt unsettled, as if they'd somehow overlooked something tremendously important about the quiet black woman they'd once dismissed. Before curiosity and suspicion could subside, the office buzzed with excitement at the sight of a convoy of sleek black cars pulling into the company's main entrance. From their desks, employees watched in surprise as the familiar Pinnacle Solutions logo gleamed on each vehicle. There was only one explanation. The company's global CEO, Lucas Miller, had arrived. When the first door opened, Lucas Miller stepped out in a tailored black suit, his expression grave and his eyes commanding respect. He seldom visited the office in person, so his sudden appearance made everyone sense that something very serious was about to happen. Flanked by a stern-faced executive team, men and women in sharp black suits, Lucas strode through the silence that fell instantly across the office. He made his way deliberately to the central work area, every footstep echoing authority. Standing amid the hushed gathering, Lucas scanned the room, then spoke in a strong, clear tone. "I am here today to address a matter of great importance concerning dignity and ethics in our company. Recently, one of our employees has endured shameful, racist behavior that I absolutely will not tolerate." At his words, Jared and Samantha's clique turned pale, their faces etched with worry and panic. Around them, colleagues exchanged anxious looks, all understanding exactly who and what Lucas was referring to. Lucas's voice grew even firmer. "I come not only as Pinnacle Solutions' global CEO, but also as an individual committed to justice, to defend and restore fairness for the person who has suffered the most, Grace Miller." When he named her, the entire office fell into stunned silence. Hearts pounded as everyone glanced at one another. Then Lucas turned toward the office entrance, where Grace appeared and stepped confidently to his side. Placing a hand gently on her shoulder, Lucas looked at her with pride and affection, his voice carrying across the room. "Grace Miller is not just an employee of Pinnacle Solutions. She is a co-founder, one of the very people who built our contract foundation and laid the first bricks of this company alongside me in its earliest, toughest days. And above all, she is my wife." His declaration rang like thunder through the office. Jared stood frozen, his phone dropping to the floor with a dull clatter. Samantha's face drained of color, her legs nearly buckling in shock. Mike and Greg exchanged bewildered looks, their eyes at last reflecting genuine fear and remorse. Lucas turned his cold gaze on Jared and his cohorts, his words cutting like a verdict. "The actions you took against Grace were not only a personal affront, but also an indelible stain on the culture and honor of Pinnacle Solutions. I promise that everyone involved in this discrimination will face appropriate consequences for their conduct." An oppressive silence followed, the kind where not even a breath dared to escape. Jared began to tremble, fully aware that the consequences of his deeds were closing in fast. Samantha bowed her head in shame, unable to meet anyone's eye. For the first time, they grasped the gravity of their hateful jokes. Turning back to Grace, Lucas's tone softened, brimming with deep love. "I'm sorry, Grace. I'm sorry I let you endure this for so long. From this moment on, no one has the right to belittle or insult you again." Grace managed a small, relieved smile. Standing beside Lucas, she looked stronger and more resolute than ever. No one could now doubt the immense inner strength of this petite woman. With his declaration complete, Lucas led Grace out of the office, leaving behind a tense, fraught silence. The remaining staff exchanged glances full of panic and regret. Jared and Samantha's group stood motionless, their minds racing with fear as they realized their careers, and perhaps their lives at Pinnacle, were crumbling. That day, everyone at Pinnacle Solutions learned a crucial lesson. They had witnessed the truth behind their prejudices, and they would now have to face the consequences of the mistakes they had made. From that moment forward, no one would ever dare to underestimate Grace Miller again. The moment the office doors closed behind Lucas and Grace, the deadly silence that had blanketed Pinnacle Solutions exploded into a storm of whispers. Every eye turned to Jared, Samantha, Mike, Karen, and Greg. In an instant, the group that had brazenly bullied and terrorized their colleagues now stood isolated, the target of everyone's outrage. Less than an hour later, Human Resources received direct orders from corporate leadership to immediately suspend everyone involved in the serious misconduct. Jared Foster, Samantha White, Mike Harris, Karen Lewis, and Greg Coleman were summoned to an emergency meeting to receive their suspension notices and be informed of a special internal investigation. As they entered the conference room, each looked ashen and terrified, emotions they had never shown before. Jared stammered out a defense, his voice shaking, but the HR director cut him off coldly. "We have all the clear evidence we need, Jared. Your racist remarks and the way you defamed a colleague were recorded and posted online. There's no denying it." At the mention of social media, Jared's face drained of color. In just a few hours, the video of him publicly humiliating Grace had gone viral, racking up millions of views and shares. Furious condemnations of his racist behavior flooded social feeds, news outlets, and online forums, creating an unprecedented wave of outrage. Meanwhile, Samantha White plunged into her own crisis. Screenshots of her malicious comments on social media, her mocking and racist jibes about Grace in the lunchroom, were unearthed and shared widely. In less than a day, Samantha's reputation as a professional manager and a businesswoman vanished. Her personal endorsement deals were abruptly canceled, and the prestige she'd built over years dissolved in an instant. Mike Harris and Greg Coleman fared even worse. After a thorough review of the evidence, including their threats to Joe Anderson to conceal Grace's true status, the company terminated both men without hesitation. The two former bullies were forced to clear out their desks under the scornful eyes of the very colleagues they had once tormented. Karen Lewis, from HR, who had willfully ignored Grace's complaints, was also suspended and now faces termination as the internal investigation confirms she enabled and covered up the racist behavior. Outside the company, the media had already mobilized. News programs ran extensive coverage of the Pinnacle Solutions scandal, turning the formerly respected firm into a focal point of public condemnation. In an official press release, Lucas Miller publicly apologized to Grace and pledged to take decisive action against all forms of workplace racism. He announced new policies aimed at eradicating discrimination and ensuring fairness and respect at every level of the organization. In his panic and despair, Jared frantically tried calling former friends at the company, only to hear the cold, empty ring of unanswered calls. He realized he was utterly alone, the very embodiment of bigotry that society was now shunning. He deactivated his social media accounts in humiliation, but it was too late. The video continued to circulate, and his career prospects were irreparably destroyed from that moment on. In her luxury apartment, Samantha sat alone in tears as she read comment after scathing comment. Every opportunity for career advancement she had worked for was now irrevocably gone. For the first time, she understood the price of cruelty. Meanwhile, Tim Carter and Joe Anderson felt as though a weight had been lifted. Joe, the aging janitor who'd faced threats for speaking up, watched with relief as justice was finally served. Tim, who had stood by Grace from the start, couldn't hide his joy at seeing her tormentors receive their comeuppance. In a private office, Lucas clasped Grace's hand, looking at her with pride and love. "You were so strong, Grace. The worst is behind you now. From this moment on, no one will be able to hurt you ever again." Grace offered a gentle smile, her heart filled with a peace she'd longed for. Finally, the justice she'd waited for all these years had been done. She realized that despite all the pain and suffering, she had the strength to protect her dignity and prove her true worth. Outside, public outrage over racism continued to grow, and Grace's story became a symbol of the fight against injustice and discrimination. Pinnacle Solutions would stand as a powerful lesson in respect and the value of every individual, no matter their background or skin color. Those who once dismissed and insulted Grace had paid the price for their cruelty, as their own actions came back to destroy the careers and lives they once so confidently flaunted. From now on, no one would ever take the name Grace Miller lightly again. After the storm of public opinion died down, the dawn of justice began to light up every corner of Pinnacle Solutions. Grace, who had once silently borne so much pain, now stood at the heart of this sweeping transformation. In her chest, old wounds were finally closing, making room for a fierce resolve and a burning passion to serve, so that no one else would ever have to endure what she had. On the first morning after the upheaval, Grace walked into the office with a completely different sense of purpose. She was no longer the small woman pushed to the margins by prejudice and scorn. Today, she strode in as the newly appointed Global Director of Culture and Ethics, a position never before created in Pinnacle Solutions history. With every step she took, she carried strength, confidence, and hope for a better future. When Grace entered the large conference room, every employee rose to their feet and greeted her with sustained applause that echoed off the walls. Gone were the sneers and mocking laughter of before. Instead, there were genuine looks of respect and admiration. Even those who had doubted her most bowed their heads in sincere deference. Standing by her side, Lucas Miller's warm voice rang out, "Please join me in welcoming our new Global Director of Culture and Ethics, Grace Miller. From this moment on, Grace will lead our efforts to foster respect, fairness, and equality here at Pinnacle Solutions. Let's never forget the lesson we've just lived through, that respect must never be based on someone's skin color, status, or background." Once again, the room burst into enthusiastic applause, all eyes fixed on Grace with unwavering trust. She gave a gentle smile, her heart swelling as she felt the power of unity and support from everyone around her. Under Grace's leadership, Pinnacle Solutions immediately launched a global campaign called Respect Has No Color. The initiative quickly spread not only within the company, but also across social media and mainstream outlets. Videos, photos, and stories tracing Grace's journey from victim of racism to champion of change became essential training materials for every new hire. In the days that followed, Grace frequently appeared at seminars and internal training sessions to share her own story. With a voice that was both soft and strong, she recounted the painful challenges she had faced, not to elicit pity, but to inspire and awaken the conscience of every listener. "I once stayed silent because I thought it was the best way to survive," Grace told a packed auditorium. "But now I understand that silence doesn't solve anything. Only when we have the courage to speak out, to confront injustice together, can we bring about real change." Her heartfelt words resonated deeply, moving many employees to tears. At the back of the room, Tim Carter's eyes shone with pride. Joe Anderson, the veteran who had stood up for her, felt a profound relief, knowing that his efforts had finally borne fruit. Meanwhile, those who had sided with Jared and Samantha now quietly hung their heads, feeling their own convictions shift. Grace's powerful example had awakened their consciences and forced them to rethink their attitudes. The Respect Has No Color campaign went far beyond internal training. Pinnacle Solutions partnered with social organizations, universities, and local communities to amplify the message of equality and respect. Everywhere, Grace's image appeared. Once the quiet sufferer who spoke out, she became an inspiration nationwide. Lucas stood by her side in the press, affirming that the fight against racism and discrimination was a long-term mission for the company. Together, they spoke at numerous public events, sharing personal stories and pledging that Pinnacle Solutions would never tolerate injustice or prejudice again. At the same time, Grace received thousands of letters of support from around the world. People who had silently suffered discrimination saw in her a beacon of hope. Those messages reminded her that her mission extended far beyond herself to millions enduring unfairness every day. In her new role, Grace pushed for robust employee protection policies and built a culture founded on absolute respect and equality. She established new ethical standards and strict measures to combat any form of bias or discrimination. Under her guidance, Pinnacle Solutions swiftly became a pioneering model for a civilized, fair, and humane workplace. As the months passed, the transformation of Grace, from a humble woman once belittled to a powerful symbol of positive change, took root far beyond the company's walls. She not only reclaimed her dignity, but also sparked a broader movement that underscored the true value of every individual in society. Now, whenever Grace walks through the company doors, she is no longer the isolated woman she once was. She has become a living emblem of resilience, faith, and hope. A leader deeply respected and dearly loved by the entire organization. And from this day forward, Grace Miller embarks on a new chapter of her life. A grand mission not just to protect herself, but to fight for a world where no one ever faces discrimination or prejudice again. After months at the helm of the Respect Has No Color campaign, Grace Miller had become an inspirational role model, a living symbol of perseverance, dignity, and fairness. She was no longer the quietly suffering woman she once was. Now, every word she spoke and every action she took carried tremendous power and could inspire people on a global scale. That evening, under the sparkling lights of an elegant auditorium, Grace and Lucas stood side by side on stage at Pinnacle Solutions' global leadership event, attended by thousands of employees and influential figures from around the world. Grace's eyes glowed with pride and serenity as she surveyed the packed hall, feeling the deep respect, support, and trust radiating from every face. Lucas stepped forward, gently taking Grace's hand. His warm, sincere voice resonated through the auditorium. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have journeyed together through many trials. But tonight isn't about looking back. It's about looking forward to a future where every individual is respected, every contribution is acknowledged, and every person is judged on their true abilities." He turned to Grace, admiration shining in his eyes. "And now, I'd like to hand this stage over to the one who has inspired and awakened us all. Please welcome our new Global Director of Culture and Ethics, Grace Miller." Thunderous applause filled the room, echoing with genuine enthusiasm. Grace stepped to the microphone, took a deep breath, and spoke with calm authority and heartfelt conviction. "Good evening. Many of you know my story. I stand here not because I'm special, but because I once endured what countless others still face every day." She paused, casting her mind back to those painful memories. The room was totally silent, each person sharing in her recollection. "I once believed silence and endurance would protect me, but they only deepened my pain. I endured contemptuous glances, cruel words, and outright hatred, all because of my skin color, my simple appearance, or the choices I made in my life." Her eyes flickered with resolve as she continued, "But I've learned that silence is never the answer. We cannot allow anyone, at any time, to be judged wrongly by their outward traits, by their race, background, or circumstances. We must judge people by their ability, their character, their hearts, and the real value they bring." Not a single soul moved. Everyone hung on her every word as though they were precious gems. My story is not one of victimhood, but of a woman who chose to stand up and reclaim her dignity, and to stand for all those silently suffering injustice. Here is the unshakable message I bring you. Never judge anyone by their skin, by their looks, or by where they come from. Instead, look at their dignity, their capability, and their heart. Gentle applause began, building quickly into a roaring ovation that swept through the hall. Grace felt her heart swell with gratitude and joy. She smiled softly and spoke once more, her voice rich with emotion and hope. We can change. We must change, and it starts with each of us, with the genuine respect we show one another. Let Pinnacle Solutions not only lead in business, but stand as a beacon for a better world, one free of prejudice, injustice, and bias. As she finished, the audience rose to their feet in uninterrupted applause. Tears of emotion glistened on many faces. Lucas, standing beside her, squeezed her hand, pride and love shining in his eyes. In the back row, Tim Carter watched with admiration and pride. Joe Anderson, who had once risked everything to protect Grace, wiped away tears of happiness, knowing his efforts had helped bring about this moment. Grace Miller's story had transcended personal triumph. It had become a powerful emblem in the fight against injustice, racism, and discrimination. She was no longer alone. Grace was now a driving force, awakening consciences and inspiring faith in justice in every heart. In that thunderous ovation, Grace realized that her pain had found its true purpose. She knew she would continue standing tall, stronger, and more resilient than ever, fighting not just for herself, but for everyone who dreams of a fairer, kinder world. Her journey, through suffering and strength, proved that human worth always overcomes prejudice, and that true respect always, never discriminates by color. What about you? Have you ever witnessed or experienced something like this in your own life? Share your thoughts below. If today's story touched you, please like, share with others, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.